All right, welcome to the Ultimate Red Wing Draft. I'm really excited. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time. We did a Michigan State basketball version of this. I'm pumped. I'm bringing in the only guy I know who might love the Red Wings more than I do, the great Odell Brettham Jr. How you doing, Brett?
I'm doing excellent. This has been the preparation for this has really kind of took me down memory lane here, so I'm really excited for this. I've been looking forward to it for a little while since you proposed the idea here.
We have to create our own silver linings. This is not something we would be doing, at least at this point in time, if the Red Wings were in the playoffs. They didn't make it, so we had to go into the archives and create content Red Wings related. So I think this is important to set up the premise, and then we'll get to it. Basically, we're drafting the Ultimate Red Wings team against each other, two-man show, and we're trying to get the best team to beat the other in a hypothetical 7-game series. So it's not just, hey, here are the best, 20 guys and your best 20 guys. It's specifically trying to beat you. So yeah, there's going to be guys that are probably omitted, especially with the Wings, with as many good teams as they've had. There's going to be really good players that we don't draft. And there's going to be guys on our fourth line that are probably not as good a player in a vacuum as a guy that didn't get drafted. Just getting that out now. We're trying to build a team of grinders and scorers, guys that can win in this series, that can play tough and play both ways and all that shit. So basically the player pool, you had to have been on the 1997 Stanley Cup team, not Paul Coffey or Keith Primo, who were traded for Brendan Shanahan at the beginning of that season. You had to have been with the team that won the cup. Your name effectively has to be on the cup through the present. Anybody that played on the Red Wings from that point to present is eligible. Other key point, you are getting these players at their Red Wings peak. So I don't suspect anybody's going to be drafting Mike Modano. He played here 1 year and scored 4 goals. I do suspect one of us will draft Brett Hull because he was very good in Detroit, but he wasn't 86 goal level good. He was in his sort of mid 30 goal era. So just to be clear, if you see some omissions, how'd you not take Modano? We're talking about their Red Wings peak. You get them in the best version of their Red Wing career, whatever season that may be. So I think that pretty much lays it out, Brett. I offered you, you're sort of the guest here, I suppose. I offered you the first pick. You passed it off to me. You deferred to the second half, if you will. All right, first overall pick, and there's a method to this madness here. I got to do it. Best defenseman of all time, arguably. Number 5, Nicholas Lidstrom, first overall pick in this draft. Slot him in as my D1. Look, I don't think this is a guy that needs a lot of introduction. If you don't think he's the best defenseman of all time, the harshest list that hates him will have him top 5. I just don't see any other way around it. The name you really see put out there is Bobby Orr. We didn't see Bobby Orr. Guy had a lot of injuries. Totally different player, much more offensively dynamic, but it's my pick. I don't know what you think. Are you mad that I took him? What do you make of Lidstrom? That's a fair 1-1, right?
Yeah, I texted you earlier. I mean, I said there were 3 guys you could take at 1. You said there's an argument for 4. So, I mean, I was wondering. I wanted you to go first because I didn't know if you were potentially going to take Fedorov at 1. I know that's probably tugging at your heartstrings there, and obviously, my next pick's going to be Steve Yzerman here, who to me if I had 1, it was going to be one of the 2. But I think going with Lidstrom at 1, it's a no-brainer. I mean, Ken Holland even remarked that the day that Nick Lidstrom retired, that's when he was going to quit his GM. I wish he would have stuck to his word because it would have helped us out a lot. But yeah, I mean, to me, that Lidstrom, he's the greatest of all time.
Yeah, and again, even if you don't think he is, like I can't find a list. Not for this exercise. I looked a long time ago. I was like, what's the lowest someone has him ranked? I think he was 3rd. You can't get anybody that says that guy's on a top 3 all-time defenseman, and it's tough to pass up on that guy, and obviously playoff performer as well. Yzerman's a fair second overall pick. Had I been in your situation, I would have taken Sergei Fedorov, and I'm going to take him at the 3rd overall pick. This is where there's going to be a quick little interesting discussion. I would argue that Sergei Fedorov still, time has healed a lot of these wounds, still is underrated by the majority of Detroit fans. I've told the story repeatedly over the years. My friend Jack, who's an NHL player, flew out for his first game. I end up in Los Angeles in a suite with Luc Robitaille, who was on that 2002 team. This was 07. So 5 years removed. So it was a lot fresher, that 02 great Red Wings team. And I asked Luc Robitaille if you could have one guy from that team and you had to win a 7-game series, who are you taking? And he said, I got to go with Sergey. I mean, that was his pick. He explained why. He said, if my life's on the line, and we all know our life's on the line, nobody's ceiling is better than that guy. No one is more talented. I'm going to go with Luke here in my own personal opinion. Fedorov, phenomenal across the board. Where do you stand? I mean, you took Yzerman above him. So obviously you give him Yzerman a little bit of a nod here. I don't know, how close is that edge for you? To me, 1A and 1B in terms of the forwards in this legacy of this modern era.
Yeah, I think it's probably the most fascinating discussion we're going to have with this draft, just because I mean you can argue Fedorov was our best player throughout the entire sort of dynasty we had, and there was a year I believe he played defense for a year, and Scotty Bowman remarked if he was a defenseman he'd win the Norris, and I mean the guy is one of the greatest hockey players of all time, and I took Yzerman over him just based off of kind of his legacy, obviously being the captain. I think that's going to lend help me out a little bit. I know we're not doing sort of the off ice stuff with who's going to help win games, but I mean it's neck and neck in terms of who would you take to kind of build your roster with.
Yeah, I mean Fedorov, honestly, a little bit of a better playoff performer than Yzerman statistically. Just looking at their Detroit career, it's close. But Fedorov's got him 163 points in 162 playoff games. So basically just a hair over a point a game. Yzerman 185 in 196 games, 0.94. Not a huge difference, but anyone saying, oh, Yzerman was the more clutch player or whatever, Fedorov was actually a little bit of a better playoff performer. The argument for Fedorov I would make is Fedorov won a Hart. It now is a 94, not within this window, but Red Wings peak. Won a Hart Trophy in 94. Yzerman never finished higher than third. Fedorov won 2 Selke trophies. Yzerman won 1. Take away their victories, there are 3 between them in the Selke. Yzerman had 4 top 10 finishes in the Selke in years that he didn't win. Fedorov had 6. I mean, Fedorov kind of checks every box above Yzerman, really across the board in terms of individual accolades. They didn't win a cup without the other. They were there for all 3 of each other's cups. So, in closing on this one, I mean, that same Robitaille story sitting next to him was such a cool. I was a huge Robitaille fan too, not to spoil and don't take him later. But he said that engaged at their peak, Fedorov rather was the best player he's ever played with. And this is a guy who had played with Wayne Gretzky, which I immediately brought up. I said, you played with 99. Are you saying Fedorov is better? He said, Gretzky's a better player. Fedorov is close, but is more talented. And that was his number one guy that anybody's ever played with, which is a hell of a statement coming from one of the best goal scorers of all time and a guy that played on that 0-2 team with Wayne Gretzky prior to that. That's high praise and certainly I think worth it. Fedorov was unbelievable. All right. You're up, my friend. You could go a lot of interesting ways here. I'm fascinated to see this one.
Yeah, so I mean, as we were talking, my mind's kind of flipping here, not to go full Matt Millen or Martin Mayhew, where I changed my mind at the last second here, but I'm going to stick to kind of what my board says, and I'm going to go with Henrik Zetterberg. And it was really close between him and Pavel Datsyuk, and I give the edge to Zetterberg just based off of the fact, I mean, again, I like the leadership component. I love the 200-foot game, and obviously Datsyuk had that as well. I just think, as I look back to kind of the 2008 series where he was matched up against Sidney Crosby and was really able to erase him. And then even looking in 2009 when he was matched up against Taves and Kane, and a little teaser, I'm sure Patrick Kane's going to be discussed a little bit later on, even just being here 1 year, being able to shut those guys down and kind of be one of the elite players for so long. And I think he's in the top 10 or so of Red Wings scoring. So really close between him and Datsyuk, but I give a slight edge to Zetterberg there.
I think it's the modern, not even really modern era. It wasn't even a full generation after. I mean, Yzerman was on a team with Pavel Datsyuk that won the Stanley Cup, but that seemed like kind of the baton passed argument between centers. As he had like Fedorov, Yzerman, it became Datsyuk versus Zetterberg. I'll take Datsyuk now. Let's get that out of the way. So put in Pavel Datsyuk. I'm going to put him at second line center. What a second line center he is. So that said, as I write him in, I think they are as close. I feel exactly the same way as I do with the Fedorov Heisman thing. It's 1A, 1B. I have friends in my circle that were really strong for Datsuk, really strong on the other side for Zetterberg. To me, I could sit and make a great argument for either, but here's why I think just slightly I would have taken Datsuk over Zetterberg. And so we're close, but both times I would have gone the other way in your situation. 3-time Selke winner. Datsuk won the Selke for best defensive forward 3 years in a row. Zetterberg, 0. Doesn't have one. He never finished higher than third. Third was his peak. He did it 1 year. That was 2008. You'll get the Hart Trophy. Zetterberg has 1 top 10 finish. He finished 8th. Datsuk has 3 top 10 finishes and peaked at third. That was the year 09 that he was hurt for the finals. I mean, we'll get started on that later, I'm sure. But he finished and did really well in that vote. That was the year Ovechkin won and Malkin was second. When you look at it, 3 Selkes versus 0, 3 top 10 finishes versus 1, a third, peak Hart Trophy finish versus 8. I'm just seeing a lot of boxes checked for Datsuk. I think he had a better peak, and with the spirit of the debate here and kind of you're getting them at their best. At Datsuk's best, he was the 3rd best player in the world during a really good era for the talent in the league. 3 straight Selke trophies. It just incredible run. And even when he wasn't winning, he was finishing top 10. It felt like every year in that award. I don't know. I just, the individual hardware, I'm going a little more Datsuk here.
Yeah, no, I think that's more than fair. And really, the only knock that Datsuk ever really had was the fact he didn't perform in the playoffs for just a short period of time leading up until really the 2007 series where we lost to Anaheim in 6 games. And that's where him and Zetterberg really started to pick up their playoff performances. And there was talk of trading him and whatnot. So that's really the only knock you can really think of. And if like what was going on with his contract, it doesn't impact this conversation at all. So, I mean, once again, you're looking at these guys and they're so close. And I actually kind of like the way it played out where you kind of lean towards the 2 Russians and I lean towards really the Canadian and the Swede here. So I think it's interesting. And I'm interested to see kind of there's going to be a few more of these where it's going to be really close in terms of which way you're going to lean. Because I think the next few rounds here that's going to be fascinating because there's so many angles you could go with.
There's a lot, and I don't even know what I want to do. I have my board. I spent too much. It's not for lack of preparation. Everything I spent too much time. It's actually your pick though, so I don't have to worry about it yet. So I think you're up here.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with Brendan Shanahan here, and obviously his accolades speak for themselves. And I mean that's the guy who got us the first cup here when we made that trade leading into opening night and then going into the 96-97 season. So having him there, a guy who put up 40 goals here 2 times, I think he was right on the precipice 2 other times here. True power forward, Hall of Famer, putting him up there on the first line with Yzerman. It's going to give me a really potent scoring line here. So I'll go there. And I thought about going defense, but I think that one's going to wait till my next pick.
You sold him a little short. He actually had 3 40-goal seasons in Detroit that first year when they won the cup, in large part because of that trade. He gave them exactly what they needed. 46 goals in Detroit. He came over having scored 1 in Hartford. So 47-goal season, 46 for Detroit. And then he had a 41-goal season in 2000 and exactly 40 in 06, his swan song in Detroit. I would have liked to have seen those last 3 years of his career be here. I'm always going to be sad about that. I think that's a guy where, he scored, I think 70 some goals, 60, 70 goals after he left before retiring. He could have been in that jersey retirement conversation if he had just stayed a couple more years. Am I crazy there?
No, and I completely agree with you. And I think it really would have helped, like I just talked about, Zetterberg and Datsuk, having another veteran with them who is still playing at such a high level that he can kind of help them get over the hump of becoming good NHL players to really legendary.
Yeah, he was what they needed. It was a little bit much earlier in the year, but it was a little similar to the Rashid thing with the Pistons 7 years later, where the Wings were great. They were the best team. They set a wins record for the NHL, 62 wins in 96, 95. They went into the finals as huge favorites over the Devils and got swept. But I mean, they were a machine before they got over the hump. but they just didn't have a power forward that could score those gritty goals and have some skill. And he was exactly what they needed. He could fight, which back then that was a big component of the game. He was exactly, you could have any player in the league basically for what they needed in that 96-97 season. I think Brendan Shanahan was it. Hell of a playoff performer, a great guy to have, and I can't argue with the pick. I think it's a good one. This is tough. I'm gonna double up on D. I'm going with Vlad the Impaler. Speaking of Detroit tragedies, this is much worse than Shanahan just leaving a couple years prematurely. Obviously, we all know what happened with Konstantinov. One of the sadder stories in the history of sports, certainly in this town. At his peak, an absolutely ferocious defenseman, terrifying guy to play against, great playoff player, could skate, could score, could pass for sure. He had opposing forwards terrified. The Flyers didn't know what to do with this guy in the 97 finals. They had that great line, Lindros and Leclerc and Renberg. They didn't want to, Lindros in particular with his history, even by then, they wanted no part of Vlad. That guy instilled fear into the Flyers, who a lot of people forget were favored going into that series. I just think he was a petrifying guy to play against and also had skill. There's some more glamorous names maybe in this situation. I got to win a 7-game series. Tough to pass up pairing him with Lidstrom. So I'm going to put Vladdy on my D1 pairing as my D2. Am I crazy for that one? What do you make of that, Brett?
No, he was going to be my next pick. I even thought about taking him over Shanahan, and I was a little young to remember kind of his when he was playing, but going back and watching clips of, there's terrific highlight film of the hits he had where he against Colorado, and especially the one I forgot who he hit in the Philadelphia series right at center ice. He just absolutely just laid him out, and he was actually the last person to touch the puck in Game 4 against the Flyers in the corner, and he got hit and whatnot. So, and I remember, obviously, my dad's a huge Red Wing fan. He's had season tickets forever, and when he talks about Konstantinov, it's like there was a point where there was a debate who was better at the time between him and Lidstrom. There was conversation that, okay, is Konstantinov maybe better in this area? Is he better at this or Lidstrom? So, having two guys of that caliber, especially being able to pair them up as you just did, it's a true shame. We never got to see what type of player he would have become.
Yeah, it is a shame. And people don't realize he was right coming into his prime. And that 96 team that won the 62 games, he finished fourth in the Norris, fourth best defenseman in the league. His final season, 97, he finished second. The guy was voted the second best defenseman in the league. And that was a really good era. That was like Bork was still great. Rob Blake. That was a really, Pronger was already in the league. That was a great era for defensemen. And he was the second best defenseman in the whole league. I think that was the year Brian Leach won. It's tough to argue. I got the best defenseman maybe ever, and a guy who at his peak was the second best defenseman in a great era for defensemen. You're back up though, sir. What is up?
Yeah, so this is where it starts to get really interesting because I'm looking at my list of centers and forwards, and it's so deep. And then you see, obviously, the top two defensemen go off the board. We start to think, okay, do we want to get a goalie? But for me right now, I think I'm going to go with Nick Kronwall. And I know people, it might be a little bit of a reach here, but my reasoning is somewhat of the Konstantinov factor where you had this guy at his heyday where, Kronwall, it became a synonymous phase with the Red Wings. And I think having him through those teams that competed for Stanley Cups in the early, mid 2000s and whatnot, that was really key. I like his game, his scoring. I think he was really just a full defenseman, and injuries played a factor, but I feel comfortable putting him on that first pairing.
I don't think it's a bad pick at all. It's not that big of a reach. You couldn't let me have Kronwall and Konstantinov. That might be just dangerous.
Yeah, we need an ambulance just on the ice.
I was taking him with maybe not my next pick, but like within the next couple. I thought I might sneak him in like 2 or 3 rounds. Honestly, underrated in a lot of ways. Everyone knows the big hits. Top 14 in Norris voting 3 straight years. For a 3-year period, they're including a Stanley Cup run and what should have been a second. He was a top 14 defenseman in the league. So, that's pretty damn good. That's good enough to be the number one on a middle of the pack team. Really phenomenal player, terrifying again in the playoffs, similar to Konstantinov. So yeah, no qualms there. I think that's a good pick, and you had to keep him away from me if nothing else. Look, I think I could probably sneak him in later, but he's my favorite athlete of all time in any sport. Doesn't matter. Dominic Hasek is going to me next. The good thing with you is you can take Osgood last because I only have one goalie slot. I can't hoard them, so I'm writing him in. Look, I think he's the best best goaltender of all time. I don't even think it's really that close when you look at the numbers, and some of those Sabres teams he was on were pretty bad. He took them to Game 6 of the finals that Brett Hall ended, that infamous crease goal. But I just think he's as good as they come. His Red Wings peak was phenomenal. He was dominant in that season. He had 6 shutouts in one playoff run, including 2 back-to-back to beat that incredible Colorado team that wins the Cup 9 out of 10 other years. It's tough to argue. I think I have a pretty big advantage having the best goalie of all time against what will presumably be Osgood later. I'm sure you'll take him last, but I have a hard time imagining a more dominant player in net in my lifetime, and certainly in the context of Detroit. Hasek's it, man. He's as good as they come, and 6 Vezinas and 2 Hart trophies. I feel good about it.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to kind of look at what you have right now with Lidstrom, Konstantinov, and now Dominic Hasek in net. I'm starting to wonder how we're going to get any shots even on net. But yeah, I think you look at Hasek. I agree with you. He's the best goaltender of all time. I mean, people will say Martin Brodeur. I think that was just aided with he just won a ton of games. Obviously, really good goalie, but for me, it goes Hasek, and then unfortunately, I'd put Patrick Waugh second. I'm disappointed in 2002 that Hasek slipped as he was skating down the ice to fight him. I think that would have been awesome, but I think Hasek might have lost that fight. No, I think that's a phenomenal pick. And listen, Chris Osgood, he's my favorite Red Wing of all time, so I'll be more than happy to take him here with the last pick in the draft. But
yeah, it's an advantage. You get him for free, basically. But yeah, you're up.
I'm gonna do it. I'm going Marian Hossa. And listen, Marian Hossa, for if people don't remember how good he was as a Red Wing, this guy was just unbelievable. We have not had anybody of that caliber outside of Datsuk and Zetterberg here since him. And I mean, we got flashes of it with Patrick Kane, but Marian Hossa, I mean, he brought such a life to this team even after we won the cup the prior year. I mean, if he played, 200-foot game, everything, playmaker. I think one of his first goals, it was in a shootout, and he, instead of shooting the puck, he took a slap shot from the hash marks and just ripped it by the goalie. And I was just laughing at that point. Like, he's so ridiculously talented. I think there's a little bit of a comparison to Fedorov in a way that he was just so talented at doing everything.
Hossa probably one of my 5 favorite players to ever play for Detroit. He'd be higher if he were here for longer than a year, but just as a player, I loved him before he got here. There's obviously, center versus a winger, but there's similarities to his game with Peter Forsberg at his peak where you can't get him off the puck. Like, you can't get the puck away from him. Hossa would maintain possession in the offensive zone under pressure, under duress for like 27 seconds. They couldn't get the puck away from him, and was strong and just strong with the puck, strong on his skates, and really a dominant player at his peak, and still the last 40-goal scorer in Detroit. It's crazy. We thought the Brinket might end it this year, especially with the start he got off to. All these years later, you're talking about 15 years later now, 09 was the last 40-goal scorer, and it was Hossa. No problem with the pick. Dominant. We know what he can do in the playoffs. He did it maybe a little bit more after. Again, one of those what-ifs. That 09, he was one of the many injuries. His shoulder was so fucked. He had that major surgery right after, before, or actually with the Blackhawks. It's a bummer what happened to him. I can't argue with that pick, though. He's a dominant player, one of the more dominant players and more imposing players, I think, in the whole pool. Look, maybe I'm hoarding him. I'm sorry. This is the top guy on my board, Chris Chelios. I'm putting him in. He's now I'm onto my second pairing D. Look, a lot of people, especially if you're younger, remember Chelios as, oh, the old guy hanging on, or even misremember, oh yeah, by the time he came to Detroit, he was kind of on his last legs or was a shell of himself. That's just not true. Chris Chelios finished second in the Norris in 02 to Nick Lidstrom in what was at the time the closest vote in the history of the league. They're still the first and last teammates to ever finish 1-2. Chelios almost won it. And again, great era for defensemen. So he was effectively, it was like a 3% loss to Lidstrom. He was the 1A, 1B best defenseman in the world in Detroit. Even prior to that, in 2000, he had a finish. He was sixth in the Norris. A hell of a player, even aside from, what people think, he was solid at the end. I mean, this guy was one of the best two defensemen on the planet at his Detroit peak. It's tough to argue. He was so good in that 0-2 run. Phenomenal. I don't know how you're going to score. I got two centers with 5 Selkies between them, and Lidstrom, Gazzatidov, Chelios, and Hasek. You better get some goal scorers in this draft, but I feel good about Chelly. Do you think that's a reach by me?
No, I don't. I think it kind of lends into potential strategy you're going with. It's, hey, we're going to shut you down. Like you're not going to score any goals. You're not even going to get any shots off. Yeah, with my next pick, I'm not going offense. I'm going to go Brian Rafalski, and crucial part of the last Stanley Cup run there. He had to play a couple seasons after, but I mean, you kind of look back at the clutch goals he scored in the 2008 playoffs with the game 5, and when Pittsburgh eventually won the game in double triple overtime there. But he scored the tying goal, or I think it was the go-ahead goal rather. And then you had later on game 6, he scored the opening goal. So clutch guy, really offensive defenseman, but another guy phenomenal hockey player and paired perfectly with your guy, Nick Lidstrom.
Yeah, no qualms. 3-time All-Star in Detroit. 2 times he finished in the top 10 of Norris, had a 12th in the Norris finish, averaged 51 points a year in Detroit, and he missed a bunch of games too, especially one of the years. So it's really more of like a 60-point guy. You mentioned the playoff success, clutch guy, even like in Vancouver with that Olympic team in 2010, he led that team in points all the way to the gold medal game. Just a great player. Won a cup before with the Devils. Big time player, bright lights guy. No qualms. You needed a D. I really like the pick. I think that's a good job by you. Starting to get a little interesting here. I think I have to go a winger, and I'm debating on between a couple. I really don't want to blow this pick, but I think this is an important one. Okay, I want a pure goal scorer at this point. I'm going Brett Hall. Fuck it. I'm going Brett Hall.
Yeah.
And another guy, and the 0-2 team is filled with these guys. Oh, they were old. They were at the end. That was Modano after the fact. That was not Brett Hall. Brett Hall scored 37 goals for the Red Wings in his best year. His 3-year average, 31 goals a season. He was an 86 goal Brett Hall, but he was above 30 goals a season, Brett Hall, and wasn't even playing that much. I mean, relative to his peak. He was an incredible player, even in Detroit, found the open spots, just a goal scorer. I feel like he's the best goal scorer on the board, arguably, certainly way, way up there. So I'm going Brett Hall. Put him next to Sergei on line number 1.
Yeah, that's impossible to debate. And I mean, you can even look back at, what was it, the 2 kids in the goat line where he was paired with Zetterberg and Datsuk. And I was watching clips of that earlier, and the guy had so many empty nets to shoot at when he was here. And he would have been, there's a couple of years while he was in Detroit, I forgot if it was 3 or 4, but each one of those seasons, he would have either been our leading scorer the past 4 years, or he would have been in the top 3. So, even at the tail end of his career, still a prolific goal scorer. And I think that pairing you have at the top line, it's lethal. So we're going to need a little bit more beef on the defensive end here. I'm going to go with Brad Stewart. And this is another guy who's really physical.
Whoa, Stewart?
Yes. And I'm doing this. I know it's potentially a little bit of a reach. He was here for a little bit, but I absolutely love his game. And I love putting him on that second unit for me. Just looking back at those, obviously, I just mentioned when he was here and kind of the physicality he brought. And I know we talked about it a few weeks ago, but the Game 7 against Pittsburgh definitely was not his shining moment. But overall, I think when Ken Holland made the trade to bring him here, it really altered how our locker room and how the team played. So I think getting that guy on our second pairing here who can kill penalties. I can even put him out on the power play. He's got a great shot. And another guy, he's going to be physical. So as you have a little bit of a older Brett Hull there, if he thinks about going over the middle, potentially we got a guy there who can make him think twice.
I mean, I love Stewart. I didn't know there was anybody out there that loved Stewart more than me. I didn't love him this much. I'm shocked by the pick. He would have been a great pick like 4 or 5 rounds from now, maybe. I will say, made a big difference when he came over in 08. 09, he was unbelievable in that playoff run until the very last game. I mean, he just had the worst night of his life at the worst possible time. I don't think that completely erases. People forget how good he was defensively in that 09 run. I mean, they couldn't score when he was out there on the penalty kill. He was such a shutdown guy at his peak. I love him on my team. I just think it's a little early. Look, I think I got to go forward again. I'm going to double up. There's a couple different options really across the board positionally. I landed on, call me crazy, I'm putting in another Russian, Slava Kozlov. Another one of the underrated guys in Detroit Red Wings lore. Was big in a couple of playoff runs. Obviously won 2 Stanley Cups. Original member of the Russian Five. Could skate, could play center, could play left wing. In this case, I'm going to put him on my left wing, but he played both left wing and center. Great two-way player at his peak. The reason why we got Dominik Hasek is he was the big trade chip in that Sabres trade. I considered taking him maybe a little later, holding on. Maybe I could get him. I don't want you to get him. I think he's an underrated player. One of the maybe 5 or 6 most underrated players that are in this pool, I would argue.
Yeah, that's a really good pick. And I mean, even looking at where he's kind of ranked all time in scoring as a Red Wing, I mean, he's in that top 20 range. So it's a guy that isn't quite literally never talked about, but very talented. And yeah, I mean, he was sacrificed for the better cause, but really good pickup by you there.
I appreciate it. All right, who you got?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go with another defenseman, and this is tough. There's obviously, I think this is probably the deepest group that we had. It's the defensemen. I mean, there's a list of like 15, 20 guys, but I love Matthew Schneider. And I don't know if people remember him when he was here, but it's another guy who can really score. I mean, put him on the power play. I feel very confident if he's out there with Shanahan, Yzerman, Hossa, Zetterberg. So and pairing him with Brad Stewart, to me it's a perfect pairing. So that's who I'm going with here.
I mean, that's the first time that you really stole my guy flat out. I was between Kozlov and Schneider. Schneider, yet another guy who is so underrated. He got here the year after the great 0-2 team, and they still won the President's Trophy, and they flamed out against Giguere. But he was in that run where he got here 1 year after they won the Cup and left 1 year before they won it again in 08. He was right, and obviously had the lockout year too, but he came here 1 year too late and left 1 year too soon. I love the pick. I wanted to make that guy my pick. It's an incredible, honestly, as far as defensemen go, the most underrated Red Wing of this era, I would argue.
Yeah, and it's to the point you just mentioned. It's because of the time he played in, where he came right after we won the Cup, and he left right before we won another one. And I remember watching that Anaheim series I referenced earlier, and I mean, he was just so good. And it was like, can we get one more year out of this guy where he can come back and listen? And I think that's another interesting conversation point. Maybe not for this exercise, but if he comes back, do we make that trade for Brad Stewart, and do we still win the Stanley Cup? And it just kind of leads to a lot of things. So I thank him for his service here, but kind of like Kozlov, he was sacrificed for the greater good.
This is one where this is going to test people when they look at this. I'm going Johan Franzen. And we remember, are you mad? Were you going to take him soon?
Yeah, he was my very next pick.
I'm glad that you're with me on this. Here's the case for him, where I could argue I could have even taken him a couple rounds earlier. We remember the bad at the end, the concussion issues, honestly, availability issues even prior to that, the long slumps, all that. 5 game-winning goals in the 2008 Stanley Cup run. 5 game-winning goals in one successful Cup run is extremely rare. I mean, Fedorov and Yzerman, I think, had like 1 or 2, and they're all there. 5. He was a clutch player. 3 game-winning goals in the 09 run, which came obviously just a whisker shy of being a successful defensive 08. if you look at the playoff run from 08 to 2010, those 3 years in a row where they won the cup, almost won the cup, and were still really good the next year, 59 points in 51 playoff games. That's a more prodigious rate than Yzerman or Fedorov. That's the most prodigious rate of anybody on this list. Nobody scored at a higher clip. And by the way, 51 playoff games is not a small sample size. I mean, at his peak for 3 years, a dominant player. He could score 7 goals in a week. He did it more than once. He just gets so hot in the playoffs. Big playoff performer. I mean, 59 points in 51 playoff games for 3 great teams. I love the pick. I'm thrilled to have him. I hope people, when they look at this, remember how good he was at that peak.
Yeah, so this next one, this is where I'm going to head back to the offensive side of kind of my roster building here, and I'm going to go with the professor, Igor Larionov. And for me, it's just I like the idea of adding another center to our roster. I like some of the flexibility I have there, as well as he was a really good hockey player here. And really probably the most iconic moment was the overtime goal against Carolina in Game 3, the double overtime where I forgot who it was.
Triple overtime.
Yeah. And he jumped up. He had somebody screen the goalie. They jumped up and he delayed the shot and whatnot. So, I mean, one of the smartest hockey players of all time. I mean, the guy was putting up 70 points in Detroit. So I feel very comfortable putting him out there and trusting in the professor.
Yeah, I mean, tough to argue. Really smart player. He's a good guy. Like we talked about, you're not going to have all 40 goal scorers. I like the pick. I have no problem with it. Not the way I would have gone, but not a bad pick by any means. It's just a great guy. He's named the professor for a reason. He's the smartest player in this draft. I mean, you got a high IQ guy on your team. That's tough to shake your fist at. Look, there's a lot of interesting ways to go here. I'm still reeling at the Schneider pick. I'm so mad that happened. This might be a little bit early to some. I like what I've seen. Dylan Larkin, third line center. I'm putting him on the board with 0 playoff experience, really. I mean, he made it his first year. He had that the series against Tampa. He was 19 years old. I think he had like one point in the series. He was a kid. I'm not really even worried about that. We have no proof of concept of this guy showing up in the playoffs, but it's not his fault. Hell of a player. I just 4 times 30+ goals already. He even had it's a far hike, but he was 20th in the Selke. He got Selke votes. You know, he's not a bad defensive forward by any means. There's not a lot of guys that have 4 30-goal seasons on the resume already. He's going to retire with a lot more than that. I like him. I think he's a hell of a third line center.
Yeah, that's a great pick. And I actually I was debating between him and Larionov. So, I mean, we're pretty on par with who we're thinking about taking here. So, yeah, and I think you start to, I mean, the one concern is potentially the injuries. He's missed some time the last few years and probably got us pretty good this year. But, I mean, the way he's evolved, you see the first game he had against when he scored on his first game and as a rookie, and that was rare. I mean, the Red Wings playing rookies, just young guys before they marinate in Grand Rapids for a decade. It just doesn't happen. So, yeah, and the way his game has evolved has been terrific. So I think that's a great pick, and I think his best hockey is yet to come.
Yeah, I want to see it in the playoffs, but again, that's not a knock on him. He's not the one holding him back. That's for sure. Oh, okay. Yep, you're up.
So now we start to get in the weeds a little bit, and it's funny as I was kind of going through this exercise, going through all these teams from '97 to the current day. It's kind of funny how things thinned out so much after like 2015. I mean, I was looking at some of it. I was joking with you. Are you going to take Damian Brunner or Corey Emmerich or these guys? So this is where I think it starts to open up a little bit, where you might take a guy that you really weren't thinking of. But I'm going to go with another winger, and I'm going to go Martin Lapointe. And this is the guy that I like his physicality and obviously his career. I mean, he didn't play up until 2008 here, but I like the physicality. I like being able to put him on the wing and just being able to protect kind of Larionov out there.
Good player. I will say it's a good thing we're not drafting coaches, because if you had Scotty Bowman, he'd be miserable. You'd have your coach in your office. I don't know if anybody drove Scotty more nuts than Lapointe. The guy took more dumb penalties at the worst time than anybody I've ever seen, not just for the Red Wings. Good player, though. I can't say, oh, what are you thinking? I mean, big physical, power forward. Obviously, a couple of rings on his finger. It's not like he was that devastating to their cause. Okay, see, this is another one. I'm gonna have to. I feel like I'm gonna have to explain myself a lot on my picks. Like, people are gonna have misconceptions. Don't laugh. I'm gonna make the case. Larry Murphy is gonna fill out next to Chelios, my second pairing D. Now, obviously, I don't think anyone's going to shake a stick at Larry Murphy's overall resume, but he's another guy in this run that was sort of written off. Oh, he's remembered as hanging on by a thread or barely even good anymore. That ain't the case. I mean, he was still one of the best defensemen in the league when he came over. He came over joining the 97 team, was still very, very good that year. 98, played the full season in Detroit, 52 points again in 99, 40 points in 2000. In Detroit, finished sixth with the Norris at his peak in that 98 season. He finished sixth. The next year finished 11th. He was a legit top 10 defenseman in Detroit.
Yeah, I don't mind that pick at all. I mean, the guy won a couple cups here. He's one of the better defensemen of all time, and it's not like he fell off a cliff to the point where you're looking at him, you're like, okay, he's the guy in the Valley Sports Detroit studio right now that kind of bumbles over his words, but he's a phenomenal hockey player, and I mean, you put him on the second pairing there, that's not too bad at all.
The guy averaged 27 minutes a night on the ice in the playoffs for the 98 team that won the cup. I mean, this guy was not like hanging on by a thread at the end. I mean, he was a horse, and he produced. He was out there. I think Lidstrom was the only one ahead of him for time on ice for that team. I love the pick for myself. I think my D is looking pretty sharp.
Yeah, and I think the way you've kind of built your roster is interesting, kind of leaning on the defense and the goaltending. Do you kind of plan to do that, or it just kind of happened?
I did if the board fell the way it did. That was my goal. I was ready to pivot if needed, but you took, for the most part, the right guys. You stole my Schneider pick. I think Schneider at his Detroit peak was better than Murphy at his Detroit peak. It's tough to say. We didn't see Schneider win two Stanley Cups. He didn't win one, let alone two. But again, that wasn't his fault. I think Schneider was a tick better at their Detroit peak. Other than that, though, I was kind of hoping to go this way. The board's fallen kind of nicely. I will say your forward group is looking a little sexier than mine right now, but there's still time. And you're up, so don't take another one. I could use a little more offense here.
I know. I'm thinking about taking another forward here, and I'm trying to modernize my team here a little bit, and there's a couple names that are just really staring at me, but I think I can hold off on a couple. I'm going to go Holmstrom, and I just need to fill out kind of my bottom six here. And I mean, the guy's probably the greatest net front presence in the history of the sport, so put him on the power play. He's going to be good out there. Obviously, he's played with Yzerman a ton, so I can have some line flexibility, but I'm going to go Holmstrom, and not the sexiest guy, but there's some seasons he put up some pretty nice stats there. And like I said, I love the idea of having him on the power play and potentially taking away some of Konstantinov's attention out there.
Yeah, he was a guy, I mean, honestly, maybe the best garbage goal player of his era. And I don't mean that as an insult. I don't care how you score. Not a ton of skill. Somehow ended up with 20-plus goals over and over and over again at his peak. I mean, he had that 2-year run back-to-back, 29 goals and then 30 goals right after. Basically a 30-goal guy for a couple of years at his peak, and we're drafting at their peak. I have no problem with it at all. He was a part of every single cup team during this run. He won 4 of them, multiple big goals. He's going to produce because he's just big and he's in front of the net the entire time, and he's got skill guys firing pucks all day. Like, he's never going to go cold for long. It's just a matter of time. I like the pick. I have no problem with it. I considered him actually next. I think that's solid. Hell of a pick. I like it. I was close, not quite there. I'm going to take our boy, Patrick Kane, put him on the board. I'll take him. And here's the argument for Kane, aside from, he's obvious as a great player. No one needs that argument really made. But even for his Detroit peak, which is just 1 year, 47 points in 50 games. And that's a 77-point full season pace, which would have led this team had he been here the whole year and that pace had maintained. It's not a guy that we can say it was fluky. The guy's had better seasons than that in the somewhat recent past, right before the surgery. I just think he is obviously won a heart, not in Detroit, but won a heart. That's the caliber of player he is. Basically a point a game player. I'm trying to think if there's a single other point a game player on the board. I don't think so. Probably the best offensive player left in this draft, and I'm putting him on there. Lord knows the guy can score a big goal, won 3 cups, won on a game-winning overtime goal. I'm putting him on my second line. I like it.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal pick, and he could have gone a few rounds earlier. To be honest, it's I mean, his impact in Detroit, and you talk about the clutch goals. Was a 5 overtime or shootout goals that determined games. He had obviously the big moment when he goes back to Chicago, and kind of the way he elevated this team. And you talk about what he's done prior to Detroit. It speaks for itself. So I mean, we're talking about one of the greatest hockey players of all time. And listen, having a point per game guy coming off that sort of surgery, it's unheard of. So to get him as one of your wingers here, you're in a hell of a hockey player.
He's so good. I hope like hell we re-sign that guy. That's my entire offseason's happiness is dependent on that. But we'll see. who you got? Who's next?
Yeah, so you know what? I'm gonna go with the guy. I love this person's game, and another thing, there's some strategy here where I need some guys who are gonna get on the penalty kill, who can come in the second power play unit. So give me Val Filppula. I think he's one of the more underrated players from that the later end of the Stanley Cup run that we had, and he went off to Tampa and had a really nice run there. Came back to Detroit, good leadership, and I like putting him really between Holmstrom and the point here, where he can. They can kind of do the dirty work, get him in some open ice situations. So, and phenomenal on penalty kill, power play, second unit. So, I'll take Val Filppula.
I want to keep like name dropping, our boy Jack, but I think he has some interesting insight with some of these picks. Filppula was one of his favorite players in that entire era. He played against him for years. He thought Filppula was one of the 5 or 6 most underrated players in the whole league. Just, a guy, he had 25 goals one year, 23 goals, had a couple of good offensive seasons, and we're talking about the peak. But he said just one of the best penalty killers he played against. Really, really good penalty kill guy. At his peak, really good face-off guy as a centerman. He's not glamorous, but hell of a bottom 6 forward. I mean, that's a good guy to have on your team, and showed up big in some big games for sure. He was often put in spots where penalty kill, and he's out there trying to cover Crosby. I mean, Zetterberg obviously a lot of that too. But Filppula drew some tough assignments and did a good job. Like the pick, no qualms with it at all. And we are getting into an interesting phase. There's a couple different ways I could go. There's a little more glamorous guys, goal scoring wise. There's some more gritty defensive type guys. I like the options. I don't think I can go wrong either way. This is going to be a little bit controversial maybe, but I'm going with it. I'm going with Chris Draper. Not the best player on the board, but the best player for my team. Chris Draper, at his peak, he won the Selke in 2004. I mean, he was the best defensive forward in the league for a season. Not a fluke. He had 2 other top 10 finishes in the Selke, which is pretty tough for a guy who's a bottom 6 forward, was never anything beyond that. He was sort of at an inherent disadvantage as that guy. Typically the Selke winner is a top 6 guy, even though it shouldn't matter. It does. He overcame that to not only place high, but win the fucking thing. I really like Draper, obviously a winner, part of 4 cups himself. For this team, I love him. I think he's the best penalty killer, arguably, in this entire draft beyond, the best of the best, the Datsuk Zetterberg types. I like the pick. I'm cool with it, even though I think there's some better talents on the board.
Yeah, and I think that's another guy where you can kind of put him out in any situation. I mean, he can go out and compete against top lines. You can put him on the penalty kill. I mean, just a really good hockey player. And the longevity thing is, I think that lends to how good of a player he was to compete through the 90s and obviously go up until 2010 or so. So yeah, I really like that pick. You can slot him on multiple lines that you have. Yeah, so I'm gonna go with Dan Cleary, and this one might get a reaction from people listening, but because of how the way his career ended, and then it's really like the 18-year-old dog that the family just refused to put down. They're deaf, blind, they can't walk, shitting itself, all that stuff. But no, I think Dan Cleary, again, I'm really focused on the Stanley Cup runs that guys have had. And I mean, you look at the clutch plays he had against Anaheim in that first round of 2009, where he scored the goal with like 3 minutes left. I like the fact that he can get into corners, he can be a little physical, and score clutch goals. And I mean, the guy scored 20 goals a few times here. He's putting up 40, 50 points. So I feel comfortable putting that guy in my lineup on the third line here.
He needed to go at some point in this draft. I mean, I would have been thrilled to have him on my, bottom six, honestly, even third line. I was 3 straight 20-goal seasons, I believe, in a row. He had 3 20-goal seasons for sure. Underrated goal scorer. I mean, we're saying underrated a lot, probably a little bit too much, but fact is, you said it. People remember the end. Really important player on some really good Red Wing teams. I like the pick. I think it's good. I'm going to go with a personal favorite here. Extremely one-dimensional, especially at its Detroit peak, but it's the dimension I need. I'm still a little bit wanting in this category. I need goals. I'm going to go for a guy who's a top 10 all-time goal scorer, scored 30 goals in Detroit, Luc Robitaille. One of my favorite players ever before he got to Detroit. This guy had almost no talent and is one of the 10 best goal scorers ever. I don't know how that happened. He can't skate. He couldn't shoot. He can't pass. He can't hit. It's not like he had some blazing shot. I still don't know how his career happened, but it happened, and it was not a fluke. It was a 18-year run, I think, or 16-year run of he's a 50, 60 goal guy plus. Just unbelievable. But again, Detroit peak, that's fine. I know we're not getting that, Luke. I'm still getting a 30 goal guy, scored some big goals in that run. I need goal scoring. I got a bunch of Selke winners. I got a great defense and goalie. Little bit lacking in goal scoring compared to your squad. I think at this point, I'm going Luke. I think I do a lot worse as my third line left wing.
I love the pick. And listen, it's funny you mentioned how he can't skate. I was consulting with my dad earlier about some of these picks, and I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? And he didn't give me too much help, so I got to have a talk with him about that. But no, Robitaille, it's funny. I mean, the guy, people turn on he can't skate. Like it's almost like he had some sort of time machine, and he just knew the right places to be at the right time, where his stick should be. I mean, he broke the Red Wings' heart when he was in LA there. So really good. I really like that pick. And listen, if you need late goal scoring here, he's the perfect guy for it.
He was a almost 40 goal guy when he got here, even in his diminished role with the team, as great as it was, still scored 30. Just one of the best goal scorers of all time by any metric. And like you said, just knew where to be. He's the worst talented, like the least talented player that was great ever. I'll take that if I'm him. I'm happy to have him. What a third line left wing Luc Robitaille is. Who do you got next?
Yeah, so this might be a little bit prisoner of the moment. I do want a little bit more goal scoring to pair up on those couple top lines here. So I'm going to go Lucas Raymond. And if you would have told me I was saying that like the day we drafted him, like, hey, you're going to be drafting him as like one of the better Red Wings over the course of the last couple decades, I would have said you're crazy. I didn't love the pick at the time, but I think his evolution after his rookie year, really struggled sophomore year, but I mean, to score 30 goals and kind of the way he was doing it, it was none of it was a fluke. I mean, this guy has a phenomenal shot, the way he's bulked up his body. I love the ability to put him really on any of the 4 lines here and get the most out of him.
Yeah, he was honestly in my short list for 3 or 4 guys. I ended up taking Robitaille instead for that left wing slot, but no problem with it. I mean, the guy, 21 years old, had 72 points, led a team that was basically, lost a tiebreaker, effectively a playoff team. I mean, the same amount of points as the team that did go. Age 21, leading what is basically a playoff team in points is really impressive. And again, sophomore year, you mentioned, not great. Rookie year, very good. I don't think there's anything fluky about that guy being good, and certainly a lot more dynamic than Robitaille. So no problem with the pick. I think it was close to a coin flip for those 2 guys, at least for me. And I was looking at 1 or 2 others. I think this guy, he was not here long, and he's more of a center, but I can put him at wing because I'm pretty full at center. I like Robert Lang. Robert Lang, another one of those guys where wasn't his fault they never won here, or he never won here. Wasn't here that long. He did his part. When they got him, 30-goal guy. He was 30 goal, literally scored 30 goals when they acquired him. So he was a 30-goal guy at his peak here. He came back with, I think it was a 20-goal season after that. Good playoff guy too, not dominant, but he had like 23 points in 36 playoff games. So, just kind kind of like a 60-point playoff type guy. Really good face-offs. If my center gets kicked out, he'll win the draw for me. I like him. For a bottom six guy, he's a 30-goal guy that was good, really good at his peak. I like the Lang picks. Who's up next?
Yeah, so I don't think we could do a ultimate Red Wings draft without Darren McCarty getting drafted here. So I'm going to put him on my fourth line, and phenomenal story. Not going to go. Everybody knows Darren McCarty and kind of the goals he scored, what he means to the franchise. So I like adding that element to my roster with Darren McCarty.
Yeah, and a guy, as tough as he was, arguably he was a middleweight as far as the fighter goes, but was as tough as anybody in the league. You could make the argument if he doesn't kick the shit out of Lemieux, do the Avalanche win again in 97? I mean, that seemed to be a mental changing of the tide where even members of the Avalanche, in hindsight, have admitted that night, March 26th in Detroit, that changed things. And it was beyond that. The guy scored goals at his peak. I mean, 19 goals at his peak. He went 15, 19, 15, 14. He had like a 4-year run there. It was about 16, 17 goals a year. And that's a guy, 0 power play time. I mean, those were all even strength. It's not like he was getting any power. Those were 5-on-5, bottom 6, fourth line goals for that guy. Multiple big goals. Obviously, the clincher, ended up being the clincher, the game-winning goal in 97, but also a hat trick against Colorado in 02. You could argue they don't win that Stanley Cup without him, which is crazy to think. As great as that 02 team was, the guy scored a critical hat trick in the Colorado series, a series that wins 7 games. They were down 3-2 at one point going to Colorado. If he doesn't have that hat trick, they probably don't even get to game 7 in Detroit. So it's crazy to think Darren McCarty may be not the reason, but a huge reason, and but for him, they don't have it. Reason why the 02 team, arguably the greatest team ever, has a cup. You could certainly make the argument they don't win it without him, but just the Colorado series alone. No problem with the pick. Anyone shaking a stick at that doesn't know what they're talking about. Great guy to have on your team in this scenario. Okay. I think I got enough to sneak this guy in. You want to talk about one-dimensional. I hate going 2 one-dimensional guys out of 3. Give me DeBrincat. He drove me nuts at points this year. I'm going to take him. 27 goals, 67 points in one Detroit season. We know what he's capable of. We know he's capable of a lot more than that. Just because he scored 27 goals in his one Detroit season doesn't mean I'm getting the 27-goal guy. I'm getting a guy capable of a lot more. We've seen that. I love it. I think for a team that needs a little more goal scoring, tough to beat a guy named Alex DeBrincat who's got the resume he has. Am I a little bit crazy taking a one-dimensional 5'6" guy at this point?
No, because I mean, you look at what he's been able to do just in his year in Detroit, and listen, a lot of bad. I hate using the luck thing because we talk about it all the time, and I think it's just an excuse by fans. But this guy had legitimately terrible luck. He hit so many posts, and I mean, he still put up some of the better forward numbers we've had here in a while from an acquisition. So I really like the pick, and especially if you're pairing him with some of the guys you have out there, I love it.
Who's up next here?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with Mo Sider here. And he's still young in his career, but putting him on the third pairing, a guy that can log 20 minutes a game, shut down, and he's carrying the corpse of Ben Sherrod around every night. So I'm really impressed with that. I'll get him a little bit of a better pairing here, but I love his game. I think he's just absolutely phenomenal. Obviously he's won awards and just a really fun athlete to watch. Physical, he never misses a game. I think that's an underrated thing for this. The guy he's never missed a game.
I'm furious with the pick because I wanted him next. I think the resume is really good for this point in the draft. We haven't drafted a defenseman. It feels like in an hour. I will certainly do, but 45-point average in his 3 seasons as a kid on a bad team. I mean, they've been mostly not bad, but on balance for 3 years, no playoff teams. He's a big guy. He seems like he'd project well in the playoffs. I think I would argue, honestly, probably by far the best defenseman on the board, just looking at least my board. Maybe I missed one. I love the pick. That would have been my next pick. I think it's a good one. Look, I'm taking Darren Helm. I'm putting him on left wing. You wanted Helm. I'm glad. I love that reaction. For a fourth line guy, you want to talk about penalty killers? I got Draper and Helm killing penalties for me. Helm, 2-time Cup winner, once in Detroit. one of those guys who was a top penalty kill guy for like 10 years in the league, had a longer career than that, but was a peak penalty kill guy for 10 years, scored big goals in his career, even though he wasn't a big goal scorer. A little bit of McCarty in that way, not stylistically, but just, 10, 15 goals, but a lot of big ones. A pain in the ass to play against. So he'll take a puck off the face to win a game in the playoffs. What a great fourth line left wing. I'm thrilled with Draper next to Helm on my fourth line. What a great playoff fourth line.
That's the best pick in the draft.
Let's not get crazy, but
I think for position wise and kind of where we are at the very tail end of it to get Darren Helm, I mean, one of the best penalty killers. There was a sequence against Chicago where, I mean, he held the puck for basically 40 seconds by himself.
I know. Yep. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I need to fill out my last kind of center here. So I'm going to go Gus Nyquist. And again, I think really solid guy. I don't love taking him here, but he had some nice years in Detroit and put up some solid stats. I think he got to 50 points once here, got close to 30 goals a couple times, and obviously got shipped out. But putting him on the last pairing here between. So yeah, I don't love the pick, so I'm just gonna let you make your next pick.
I'm going Philip Hronek. I'm not saying I love him, but I got 2 D spots. I think he's probably the best on the board. I would have preferred Sider, but you took him. End of the day, had a 39-point season and a 38-point season in Detroit. So back-to-back, basically a 40-point guy. Third pairing D. I got an incredible top 4. I don't need him to have a huge role. I think he may be a little bit underqualified for the role he was in as a third pairing guy. Overqualified. I'm happy with him. I'm good with Hronek as my third pairing D.
Yeah, and I think who do you have him paired with? I think that's going to be.
Well, that'll be my last pick. That's my last pick in the draft. So,
all right,
TBD.
So I'm going to take a defenseman here, and I hope potentially it's one of your guys. I'm going to take Slava Fetisov, and not sexy. I mean, he wasn't great in Detroit, but I mean, there was a season he only played here for 4 years. He had 42 points in a year, plus 37 on the season. So I like pairing that with the younger Mo Sider here, and just kind of having a competent penalty killing defenseman.
I'm fine with it. Not the guy I would have taken, but I have no problem with it. I think that's solid enough. But I'm going to go with Steve Duchesne as my last pick in the draft. Look, I think he's a guy, better remembered certainly for his career before he got to Detroit. Had incredible career. He had like 250 goals or something in his career for defenseman. Incredible. But even at his Detroit peak, comes over. He won the Cup in 2002 with that great team. He played on that team. He was good on that team. I think he was mostly a third pairing defenseman, but he played like he was a critical member of that team, sort of on the back end. And also just his peak was really good. At that 2000 season, his first year in Detroit, 41 points, 10 goals, 31 assists for a really good Detroit team. They flamed out in the playoffs, but a really good Detroit team. 40-point guy, one of the best defensemen of his generation prior to arriving, certainly offensively anyway. I'm good with it. I think he's a worthy last pick, a guy who we've seen play. You look at arguably the best team ever in 2002 that won a cup. He was good enough to play a big role on that team and good enough to have a 40-plus point season in Detroit prior to that. I'm good with it. I don't love it, but I'm good with it.
Yeah, it's just a really solid pick. We're looking here, and I'm looking at some of the other names that I had left on defenseman. Duchesne was up there. I almost threw up writing one of these names down, Jonathan Erickson. But I mean, he had a couple of years there where it's like he didn't make me want to gouge my eyes out. Danny DeKaiser. We started to get really thin here. So I'll round it out. My last pick is going to be my favorite Red Wing of all time, Chris Osgood. I believe he should be in the Hall of Fame. He's got 401 wins. He won 3 Stanley Cups here. We don't win the 2008 Cup without him. I think that's sort of forgotten that he came in replacement of Dominic Hasek there, your guy. So hopefully we get that version. I think he should have won the Conn Smythe that year. I know Zetterberg won and another one of my players here, but I think Chris Osgood is just phenomenal goalie, and very happy to have him. And there really wasn't that much competition. There was really 2 goalie choices that we're going to have. It's Hasek and Osgood. So very happy to come out with my guy.
you look at like a guy like here's the interesting thing about Osgood, and I'm such a more high to me. Osgood's a weird favorite Red Wing. Maybe we'll finish there with that explanation. And I like him, but in his career, just big moment after big moment, and sort of forgotten his playoff career. Now, not in Detroit, but almost all of this was in Detroit. I think one of them wasn't. 15 shutouts in the postseason. For reference, a multi-time Vezina winning trophy goalie, who's the top paid goalie, I believe, still right now, certainly was. I think he still is. Sergei Bobrovsky, in 10 playoff runs, has one shutout. One. In his entire career, he's got one. That's the top paid guy with multiple Vezinas for best goalie in the league. One in 10 playoff runs. Osgood had 15 in his career, 14 in Detroit. Look, shutouts aren't everything, but that just goes to show. I mean, he had multiple games where he just was incredible. And obviously, this was the clear-cut pick for you. You weren't going to take anybody else. Why is he your favorite, though? That's an interesting favorite pick for me.
Yeah, I don't really know when it started. I just, as a kid watching them, I was always gravitated to Chris Osgood. I loved, I mean, even when I played hockey growing up, I was the only kid with a red helmet out there. And I remember going to Piranhas with my dad and whatnot. We were picking out equipment, and I got the red helmet. I was super happy about that. And they loved it too, because I was easy to spot on the ice. But no, I always wanted like the neck guard he had, the plastic one, but they told me like centers, you can't wear that. So no, I've always loved Chris Osgood. I think I was my first autograph. I have mini replica Stanley Cup signed by him up in my room right now. So yeah, I've always loved Chris Osgood. I remember uh, crying when he left and all that stuff. So yeah, I've always had a very strange attachment to him.
I mean, it's funny you said that. I was actually going to ask you because I remember when I heard about the trade for Hasek, which Osgood was hung around for I think a couple months before they, shipped him off to the Islanders. But I remember I was we were on vacation. I was would have been 14 at the time, and I was sleeping like in the bed next to my dad. I think the girls were in like my mom or whatever was in the other room. So, and he had a little transistor radio. He put one little earbud in his ear, and he knew Hasek was my favorite player, like favorite athlete. Period. That was before Detroit. That was my guy. You could not have made me happier, and he knew that. He knew I was a huge Hasek guy. So he heard on the transistor radio either that it was done or it was almost done. The Rich Winter thing. They called him. He had a little bit of he had to basically punt $1 million to come here, which he did. It's just I remember being like sort of shaken awake and informed of this trade by my dad, and got up like early in the morning, just running around yelling. I like woke up the neighbors, my sister and mom next door kind of thing. You were crying. You had the opposite reaction. I find that interesting. You were mad about acquiring the greatest goaltender of all time. That's fascinating.
No, I wouldn't say I was mad. I was just like, hey, my favorite player is gone, and that was very tough on a young Odell back then. But no, having him come back and win 2008 Cup, that was like one of my favorite Red Wings memories. And I think a lot of my team is based off of somewhat of that run. I obviously you have really the '96 team that didn't win it all, but won 62 games. I think you said earlier that through 2003, 2004, that was phenomenal. But to me, I really gravitated towards the teams that were the Zetterberg and Datsuk years. I just think something about the way they were built and the way that they played. I just, even watching, I mean, we had a few weeks ago, I'm sure you remember, where we were going through the 2009 series and how everything went wrong for us, and going back and watching those games and seeing just how good our teams were, and four lines, three pairings of defensemen, we've had so many good players here.
Well, Brett, great job by you. I'm looking forward to putting this up, and we'll see what the judges think and the public thinks about this. I like my team. I got to look at it against yours, but I think it was a fun exercise. And man, what a great run the Red Wings had, that you can draft two full teams and like the fourth liners are, the Brinket, and we got Selke winners. We got Selke winners and 40 goal scorers on our fourth lines over here. It's like, what an incredible privilege it has been to be a Red Wings fan. This was fun, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me do this with you. I love doing this. I was taking notes nonstop the last few days ever since you proposed it, and yeah, I'm interested to look at. I like your team just based off of kind of the first defensive pairings, but I'm sure we'll analyze it back and forth, and yeah, just if we could just get one more Stanley Cup run in the next couple of years here, just one more Stanley Cup, I'll be set. Like that's what I want almost more than anything else. Just one more.
I won't decline it. I'm already all set. They can't really piss me off. Like I was mad about the collapse. I had the best childhood ever following this team. I mean, I'm a little older than you. You're like the 97, 98 thing doesn't resonate with you. It does with me. The first finals I watched, the first playoffs I watched was 94 when the Rangers won. By 97, I was like watching every single game intently. So I want them to win. They can't hurt me. They cannot hurt me. It'll take another 20 years before I really feel like pain. The Tigers, I haven't seen them win one, let alone four. It's the same thing with the Lions. Those just hurt so much more. I'm not fighting you, but what an incredible childhood rooting for that team. It was so fun and just unbelievable. Brett, you're the man. You got the better forwards. I got the better D and goalie. We'll see how much better and how that shakes out. I plan on throwing this to an expert panel. We got one already agreed to. We got a couple more to add. We'll see what Twitter thinks. I'm not telling these people who's who yet. I'm not, at least not the judges, because you're a much more popular figure than me. I don't want to bias the judges against me. But, man, great job by you, and I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you. And, yeah, we won't have Soldier compare our stats here, our teams.
No, well, yeah, Soldier's going to see how many communists I have on my team, and he might pick mine. Yeah, Soldier realizes I got more Soviets, so that probably – if I'm playing with a judge here, I got to draft as many fascists as possible. The ultimate Red Wings draft. Great job by you, Brett.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it, Justin.